International adoption is the process of adopting a child who was born in a country different than the adopting parents. And interestingly enough, people from all over the world adopt internationally. When families from the United States travel to South America to adopt, they often find themselves staying in hotels with families from Israel and families from Western Europe and Australians. And so families from all over the world do adopt internationally. Each country who's considered to be a sending country for international adoption makes its own decisions about whether it wants to make its children available for adoption by outsiders. And some of that becomes an issue not just of the economy of the country itself, but also of national pride. Which is also responsible for the fact that some programs do have a reputation over years of having opened and closed kind of erratically over time. Once the country gets new leadership, perhaps the leadership says, oh, it's embarrassing to be sending all these children to the United States and Great Britain. Let's close the doors to international adoption and get those kids adopted at home. And it may take several years for the government to realize that they're not successfully finding homes for those children. But international adoption also is interesting in that families need to look at whether or not they're looking to adopt a child of the same race as they are. For a long time it was the case that families who were adopting internationally were always adopting children who were racially different than they were. It started with adoptions from Asian countries, particularly Korea, and then it moved into South America and Central America and into the Philippines and into India. And it's only really been in the last decade or so, well, a little more than a decade, since the fall of the Iron Curtain and the fall of communism in Russia, that there has been adoption involving Caucasian families adopting Caucasian children again. And that's happened to a large extent with families traveling to the former Soviet Union countries to adopt their children. Now there was a time just after the Second World War when there were a lot of Greek children available for adoption and a few Italian children available for adoption. But in general, since international adoption has been kind of rampant, you'd almost say, most of it has been transracial. The interesting point is that very often families talk about their children born in Asia and their children born in South America and in India as if they weren't racially different. In our country, we are still caught in the jaws of racism, and the grade of color is a part of that racial hierarchy. The darker the child, the more likely it is going to be difficult to get a European American family to adopt that child. The goal, of course, for African American children domestically is to place them with African American families, although there are still families like mine who adopt African American children. But when we're talking about international adoption, we're talking about Asian children. Those of us who've already adopted transracially don't understand often why the families who've adopted from China and the families who've adopted from Korea and the families adopted from India seem to think their children are going to have fewer racial problems than African American children who are transracially adopted or Latin American children who have been transracially adopted. The truth is, all these kids are going to have issues to deal with. And before you can decide that you're going to do an international adoption that involves adopting across racial lines, I think it's extremely important that you give some considerable thought and time to how you're going to do that in a way that allows this child to really claim the culture of his heritage, and not just in a historical fashion, but in a way that will allow him to feel authentic among other people of that culture, so that a daughter born in China can move in Chinatown circles in San Francisco or New York and feel that she belongs there, that she's not out of place in any way, and that she knows what she's doing among folks at least to the same extent that a fourth-generation Chinese American child would know. And that's a challenge. It does demand a different mindset than adopting a child racially the same as you are.